This is a Suno India production, and you are listening to Beyond Nation and State. The discipline of international relations and its practice, which includes foreign policy, is an esoteric field. Debates on foreign policy and international relations are abstract and rarefied, as if it doesn't affect the lives of people. But on the contrary, foreign policy decisions affect all kinds of things that matter to people. It can decide whether a country is at war or not, the prices of food, medicines, and consumer goods, borders and citizenship, mobility and travel, and much more. So, who are the makers of Indian foreign policy? Do they hail from a certain socio-economic background which can be described as quote-unquote elite? Are they only from a particular class or also from a certain caste? Do the socio-cultural and economic backgrounds of decision makers affect how foreign policy is made? The guest on the 5th episode of Beyond Nation and State is Pavan Kumar, a PhD candidate at Jawaharlal Nehru University's Center for International Politics, Organizations and Disarmament. Pavan's research interests are the history of India's foreign policy, theories of international relations, gender, and caste. So, Pavan, let's get started. Our point of departure is another conversation which you were part of. I heard you speak at the Global South Adda, where you were part of a discussion on caste and international relations. You spoke about how you began to think about the relationship between caste and foreign policy after the suicide of the Dalit student Rohit Vemula. Can you explain why?
Before Rohit committed suicide, uh, not many teachers introduced us about the role of caste in classrooms and in the universities. But suddenly, when Rohit committed suicide, and in response to that, we start participating in the rallies and the protests and the movements. When I heard a lot of students leaders talking about the condition of students coming from the reserve categories and how they are continuously marginalized in these university spaces, this thing came to my mind that yes, caste is also a factor which plays a very critical role in get coming to the universities and shaping the structure of the knowledge. So at that moment, I think I start reading a lot about the caste and starting having start observing things from that perspective. So that's how that at that moment I started looking into the relationship between caste and production of knowledge, and how modern universities, which are supposed to be fair in selection, in awarding degrees, are not fair, and they are discriminatory in nature. And that was the starting point for me to enter into this subject field of study.
So, let's talk about caste and international relations. You've taught courses like Norms and Identity in World Politics, Introduction to World Politics, and Theory of International Relations. You're also a PhD candidate, and you're currently doing your thesis on Sardar Patel's foreign policy. So, as somebody who's been part of these foreign policy spaces, whether it's universities, whether it's think tanks, or other kind of intellectual geographies, how do you think caste plays a role here?
Generally, we haven't explored this field a lot because this kind of scholarship demand a lot of commitment and a lot of sacrifices also, because still talking about caste in university spaces is not an easy thing to do. When I teach classes on IR, there is a space for talking about gender and IR, race and international relations, but there's hardly any reading on role of caste and IR. There is not a single mention of caste and IR. When if there is can be a relation between race and IR, if there is a relation between gender and IR, then obviously caste is one of the most predominant phenomena of Indian society, Indian state. And so why we should not talk about that? And that was a curiosity was in my mind, that why there's been no work on this. Because if we start with the first question which A.N. Tickner asked in an article, that when I see the field of IR, most of the key person and personalities happens to be the man. And then she asks the questions why. So if I take that question and apply in Indian IR, both practices and the classrooms, and the theory building and the policy writing, most of the people, most of the scholars, most of the practitioners coming from one particular caste. So that is an interesting things to watch. That if the research has happened in these areas, then we should also do some research in this aspect, and this would make our IR stronger. This would make our Indian IR more inclusive in nature. For example, take the list of the teachers who are teaching in Jadavpur University, and the professors in Jadavpur University currently who are teaching in Jadavpur University. If you see their surnames, then it goes like Sarkar, Mishra, Sen, Majumdar, Chatterjee, and Basu. Out of 8 names in the Jadavpur University, you know what that does? Eight names suggest that yes, out of eight professors are coming from almost one caste. There is no confusion about the caste. At least they clearly saying, I'm Sen, I'm Majumdar, I'm Sarkar. And the same. So this is about universities. For example, let's go away from the universities and talk about the India's think tanks. For example, India's oldest think tanks, ICWA, Indian Council of World Affairs. And if you see the its director generals for in those old years, or the president before India's vice president was the president of the ICWA. The first president of ICWA was Tej Bahadur Sapru, then H.N. Kunjru from 1948 to 1975, then Sardar Swan Singh, then Ram Bhagat, and Jaswant Singh, Srikant. So there is an entire list of the people who are controlling these institutions, be it ICWA, be it foreign secretary. You see the list of foreign secretaries in India, or you see the list of foreign ministers of India. If I just could give some example from there, the list of foreign secretaries. Uh, for example, uh, uh, foreign secretaries, we have KPS Menon, we had RK Nehru, we had Samil Dutt, we had MJ Desai, then we had CS Jha, then we had Dayal, then we had Kaul, then we have Mehta, then we have Rasgotra. And check the list of India's ambassadors to China. Uh, First is K.M. Panikkar, second is Raghavan, then Nehru, then Parth Sartri, then Banerjee, then Mishra, then Malhotra. So apart from K.R. Narayanan, most of them coming from one caste. So this is a point which certainly hits me, that there is something very familiar in all the spaces, be it in the think tanks, be it in foreign secretary, be it the foreign minister, or in the universities, all coming from the same family. And what are the reasons for the same? So that was my urge to made an inquiry into the history of these institutions and who these people are and why they were at the helm of the affairs.
So, what spoken about is, I think, the practitioners of foreign policy, who include diplomats, academia, think tankers, and also journalists. When come to the study of foreign policy and international relations itself, one could argue that it has nothing to do with Indian society. It has everything to do with the outside world. It has to do with interstate relations. So then why should we be talking about caste?
we should be talking about caste because it suggests the homogeneity of these groups, be it India's foreign secretaries or the foreign ministers or the professors. It suggests that we are not allowing the entire nation to represent in these spaces. Only one part of the nation is representing India globally. So the question would arise, obviously, if a person coming from the same family, year after year occupying the same post, then what about the other talent which is there in 1.3 billion population? We should have maybe, if in place of KM Panikkar, you would have some other fellow, or at China, maybe would have avoided the confusion which we had. So because there was a certain patronage from Nehru or others in these places, and so maybe there would have been some diversity at these places, and because there is no diversity, there is no disagreement. The disagreement is less in the foreign policy making, in the theory building, because rarely we see in Indian IR theories, in Indian IR schools or Indian practices, rarely we see a disagreement intellectually. If a book comes into the market and people buy it, everyone praises it, and that is over, and next book comes. That was not the tradition. That is not the tradition in other countries. Like if there is a liberal school, then there is a realist school, and they disagree with each other. They, when there is a disagreement, when there is a criticism, then only the discipline progresses further. But here, because the both the members in the same department coming from the same family, so they bother not to disagree. They rather celebrate the work of the senior professor. So I think that is one of the things. Disagreement is good for the policy. Disagreement is good for the development of the discipline, and disagreement is possible only when we have people coming from different socio-cultural backgrounds, because they are coming from their own historical cultural baggages. They would see things from a different perspective, and that would allow a diversity in the meetings. In when we come do a meeting on some foreign policy issue, there would be a diversity. So I think the issue of caste is necessary from that perspective, that this homogeneity is dangerous for the growth of the discipline. This homogeneity is dangerous for the growth of foreign policy, both.
So you've said that homogeneity is dangerous, and I definitely agree with you. I'd like to cite a data point here. This is about the representation of scheduled castes and scheduled tribes in higher education. Dalit enrollment in 2018-19 fell short of the mandated quota of 15%, as did scheduled tribes' mandated enrollment quota of 7.5%. Most states have failed to ensure that at least 22.5% of students enrolled are scheduled castes and scheduled tribes. So how do you think this has affected the study of the discipline of international relations in spaces like not just Jawaharlal Nehru University and Jadavpur University, but other spaces in which international relations is taught?
It is affected through various ways, as you cited the data that this is the condition of the representation after the reservation is there. And suppose if there would have been no reservation, then how much the representation should have been there? We just can make a guess. We actually do not know what would have been the condition. So this is the condition after the years after years reservation. And still, but this reservation have reached not to the higher stages, because you might get a job through reservation, but it is difficult to enter into these privileged spaces. You might become a professor, assistant professor in Jawaharlal Nehru University, but to get a chapter in one of the book edited by maybe the chairperson of some think tank, it's difficult for you, because they would allot that chapter to the person who they know. So you would not be able to get that research published that easily. So you need access for the publication. This I just remember, not from the Aya perspective, and you know Ramchandra Guha writes in one of the introduction of the book. He says that when I was writing on environment, and I went with my proposal to the editor, Penguin House Random then, and so what he found, luckily, that the editor of that house, publishing house, was his classmate from St. Stephen's. So how these things work when it is out publication. The same thing applies to the promotion. So if there are people from the same caste, same family, it's easier for you to get promoted. It's easier for you to get the highest post, to become the chairperson. Chairpersonship is denied, professorship is denied to the people coming from the. There are research available on this. Like professorship is denied to the people coming from the reserve categories. Otherwise, how come not a single professor in Jadavpur University, even after the reservation in that list? There has to be something. And what does this explain? So maybe, yeah, it reflects the reality that because there are not many mm, big names at the helm from these communities, and that's why it's very difficult for the newcomers to survive in these spaces, and because they don't get an help or a guidance the way the others get. So I would say it affects them that way. That's why very high drop down, like drop from the universities also.
So I'd like to quote something that you said. You asked this question, which I found very relevant. You said, who are the most established scholars in international relations today? Who do we read in newspapers? Who do we listen to on TV? Whose articles do we read and whose articles do we cite? There are people from a specific caste or bunch of castes whose knowledge we are citing. Who are they? Who are the people who are represented? Who are the people who have been national security advisors or foreign secretaries since the time the post was created? Who are the key advisors in the foreign policy establishment? Where are they coming from? There is a strong caste link. Who are the key ambassadors, or rather who have been the key ambassadors to United States in China? Who teaches IR theory in colleges? And these are your words. If you don't ask these things, it presents a distorted picture. I think those are very powerful words to state. And related to this, I also wanted to bring up something that was said by the Chinese studies expert, Jabin T. Jacob. And he talks about the problems of Chinese studies in India. He says, at the root of the problem of identifying the best and the brightest in Chinese studies are the twin problems of caste and class. He speaks about high priests' willful neglect through various forms of overt and subtle discrimination of students and scholars from the lower castes and economically backward classes. So, who do you think are these high priests that he is referring to? Or, in other words, or to ask you in a much more straightforward manner, do the practitioners of foreign policy as they stand today, whether they are from academia, diplomats, think tanks, or media, do they almost always hail from a specific background?
To answer this, I would like to go back a bit. I would like to go back to 1930s and 40s, when Indian IR, the discipline itself, was started. Like in 1936, Indian Institute of International Affairs was set up in Delhi. And that institute was set up by Taraknath Das, Lajpat Rai, M.N. Roy, Krishna Verma. These people were writing, this was not set up by them, but these people were writing on these foreign policy affairs. And there's one more person named Binoy Kumar Sarkar. He had written a paper on Hindu theory of IR, and that was published in American Political Science Review in 1919. So the people who started the IR at that time, or those who were discussing the affairs of foreign policy, if I name them, like Binoy Kumar Sarkar, Tagore, or Ravindra, or Ghosh, or Nehru, or Gandhi, Girja Shankar Bajpai, Tej Bahadur Sapru, Surendra Kumar Dutt, Mudliar, P.N. Sapru, H.N. Kunjru. These were the people who were associated with the birth of the IR in India. Okay, and all of them, almost all of them are coming from the one caste, that is Brahmin caste. So once IIIA, Indian Institute of International Affairs, was established in 1936, and there was a competition of both Hindus and Muslims in this, but uh, mm, Sapru and Kunjru, and after some time they starting dissenting with the IIIA, because this was a very pro British organization. British was funding this organization, so they broke away from the IIIA and they set up another organization called Indian Council of World Affairs. That was the year 1943. And one request to send a delegation for IPR was, requested from Delhi. And the vice chancellor of Delhi University, you know, vice chancellor of Delhi University was asked to send a delegation to the IPR. And what does the vice chancellor of the Delhi University observe? He says about ICWA. This is the word of the vice chancellor. He says, and the name of the vice chancellor is Maurice Goyer. In 1945, he says ICWA consisted almost entirely of members of one community and similar political complexion, that is Hindu upper caste Brahmin. The similar kind of words are reiterated by Sultan Ahmad, who was the president of IIIA the same year. He says IPR left with a team made of all Brahmin group of one school of thought. He also suggests. So when ICWA was formed in 1943, that year, almost everyone is a Brahmin in that list. There's a book written by T.C. Raghavan and Vivek Mishra. This book is Sapru House, A Story of Institution Building in World Affairs. And if you check the photographs of this book, there are certain photographs, attached in this book. And in this photograph, if you read the names of the people who are in these photographs, then they are V. Srinivas, S. V. Gokekar, M. S. Rajan, A. Appadurai. All of them are very explicitly have Brahmin surname. So the question is, or the interpretation is this: he did not write the books with that intention. This is my own interpretation. That when the discipline was established, when in the form of IIIA, and later in 1943 Indian Council of World Affairs, and later ISIS, Indian School of International Studies, which were later turned into SIS, School of International Studies in Jawaharlal Nehru University, all these institutions were, I would say, dominated by, or captured by, or represented by one caste, that is Brahmin. And when one institution is represented or captured by from one society, people coming from one society, one caste, obviously it's very difficult for the others to enter into that. For example, when ICW was started, and after that they also come up with their journal, India Quarterly. Who was the person who written the editorial for that? The famous IR names were there who were writing the editorial, and they also happen to be coming from the Brahmin community. So once this is the history of the Indian IR, and if someone is entering into these places, like, and they remained in these positions for not for 1 year or 2 years or 3 years, as I highlighted in the few minutes back, one person remained the president of ICWA for almost 30 years. So in those 30 years, what he was doing, maybe he was there a test conducted to appoint the people in the ICWA? Was there a entrance happened for the people appointed in the ICWA? No, they appointed their caste fellows in these places. And so it takes 20, 30, 40 years to finish one journey of one professor. So they remained there. So they did not ask the different question. They keep on asking the same question which their forefathers was asking. And that's why it is necessary now for all of us to investigate the writings which they have written in those journals. Like we now to do more research on the content of India Quarterly from 1947 till 1977 or 1987, or the content of the School of International Studies general, that is International Studies. That would reflect a clear picture, because this representation from only one community led to the non-rigorousness of the discipline. So the roots of this misrepresentation, roots of non-representation of other communities is not from us doing, from our generation doing. This is 40, 60, 70 years old story, and we need to unearth that thing, that history. So I think the point is there in 1947, in 1943.
I think that was extremely useful background for our understanding, and this is background that very few people are familiar with, or indeed would want to be familiar with. But this is so important for our understanding of how the discipline of international relations evolved in India, how it is practiced today in our country, and how it is understood. So if we think about the way the Indian government has dealt with accusations of being casteist at international forums like the United Nations, we see that India has a history of being very touchy and very sensitive, where, for example, India would accuse South Africa of being racist towards Indian citizens in South Africa, but wouldn't acknowledge its own casteist faults. So much so that, in fact, the scholar Vineet Thakur, he speaks about how the Indian government had proposed a very casteist solution to the problem of South Africa's racist attitudes towards Indians in its country. And the solution was, well, you have a racist problem on your hands, but you do need to include Indians. So why don't you select some of the most capable Indians who are Brahmins? And therein is the solution to your racist problem. But it's exactly these kind of anecdotes or this kind of evidence which doesn't get exposed unless someone really goes digging for it. And even if we look at recent history, the Indian government has always ignored, denied, and dismissed any allegation of being casteist. It has also denied efforts by Dalit groups to have casteism classified as a form of racism. So I'd like to ask you something, Pavan. Internationally, the Indian government readily concedes to problems of poverty and even forms of gender inequality. But why is it silent on the problem of caste? What do you think is the explanation?
There is a very easy answer to this also, and there is a very long and difficult answer to this also. The long and difficult answer is this: that we have this mentality that there's nothing wrong with the caste. It's part and parcel of our culture. And this has its roots not just in today's diplomats or today's scholars. This has roots, this goes back to Kautilya and Gandhi. They all consider this. There's nothing wrong in it. If you read the biography written by Ramchandra Guha, Gandhi Before India, there is a two-part biography on Gandhi, and in the first part biography of the Gandhi, you know, uh, if you could, and from reading that, I went to some of the original letters, original speeches of the Gandhi at the website, and then I found it out because I written a paper on this Gandhi and the racism. Gandhi in Africa believed that the black or the South or the African people, they are lesser human beings than the Indians. And he did not change his views till he came to India. And he did not change his views on the caste also. He never said that I am against caste. He said I'm against untouchability. That is for sure. He was against untouchability, but he never said that I'm against caste. Because we are trying to understand caste and international relations. Who were the people who were working in the fields in South Africa? And who were the people who were the owners of the mills or the lawyers in the South Africa? If a migration happened, then migration had to have happened to at least two kind of people. One who were rich and higher caste, and one who was poor, indentured labor. That should also be the part of the study of IR. That who was forced to leave and who went because they had more money there. And the people who were indentured labor in these colonies, who were from the Indian origin, Gandhi never, at least this is what my sense of reading history suggests, that Gandhi rarely came in contact with this indentured labor. Gandhi came in contact with influential people in South Africa. That's why his understanding on caste was very, very problematic. The same thing applies to Kautilya also. There is a currently there is a what I say, a kind of so-called revolution going on in Indian IR. We are trying to celebrate the Kautilya. They are celebrating. No, he's a secular thinker. He was a Machiavelli before Machiavelli, and but they ignore Kautilya's advice that king should maintain the varnashram, not the varnashram, the four varnas: Brahmin, Kshatriya, Vaishya, and Shudra. They celebrate Kautilya without mentioning his. So most of these scholars, most of these practitioners are okay with the caste. Actually, they have nothing against the caste. They think this is the part and parcel of society. We have not made it, so why we should destroy it? But the thing is, it would not go away easily. You have to destroy it. You have to find the ways to destroy it. If this is this is not an egalitarian society. So, for example, take Vijay Lakshmi Pandit. The response from Vijay Lakshmi Pandit and others. Indira Gandhi, spoke in one of the writings about Vijay Lakshmi Pandit, and she writes that Vijay Lakshmi Pandit was her behavior towards Kamala Nehru was very, very bad. She used to insult her, and so this is our traits in these top leaders who were in charge of the affairs. Vijay Lakshmi Pandit was in charge of American affairs and then also in the USSR. So these key people in that time, Gandhi, or for that matter, Chanakya, or for that matter today, most of them think there is nothing wrong in about caste. And so why talk about caste? If I talk about caste, they will be first worried about why are you talking about caste and IR? What is there in caste and IR? But obviously there is so many things in caste and IR, because asking the question that who were the forefathers of the people who are currently living in in outside of India, the indentured labor. Who were they? And asking the caste of those people is as necessary as asking the caste of Gandhi. The first line of Ramchand Guha's biography of Gandhi is that Gandhi was born in a Baniya family. That's great thing that Guha is saying. That's the first line of the biography that he identifying. But now is the time to identify the caste of the indentured labor. Who were they? Because that is also the part of international relation. Doing international relation is not just studying the war. Doing international relation is not just studying the nuclear war, nuclear fight. Doing international relation is also talking about gender, talking about race, and talking about caste. So I think that's why it is necessary. If now is the time to talk about this. For 70 years we have not talked about it. If they have not talked about it, fine. Now is the time that we will talk about it. You will talk about it. I will talk about it. So that's a good starting point, I think.
When you discuss caste in your classrooms today, in your discussions of foreign policy and IR, how do students react? Are they opposed to you, or do they want to enter into a conversation with you, or are they surprised that you would mention it at all?
Generally, the new students who are coming after schooling, they are not introduced about caste. They are socialized into caste, and they all are, almost all of them, especially the higher caste and OBCs also to a very large extent, and they are very proud of their caste. They are not ashamed that this is something wrong. It's not been told to them. So the moment I talk about caste, there is a certain kind of aversion. There's certain kind of discomfort with the students. But the good thing is, because they are young minds, they are 20 years old, 21 years old, and you can always uh, uh, start discussing things with them. The good thing is that they are ready to discuss the things, and I have observed a good number of them. Actually, I have learned so many things on caste and especially gender from them. My Because I'm working on both caste and gender together, so I have learned so many things from them. So I would say first time it's a shock to them. They just suddenly know how this is possible. When I say that the all the OBCs are Shudra, they suddenly say, no, I am not a Shudra, I am Rajput. you know they think they are Rajput. All the OBCs almost think they are Rajput, they are Thakur. If you talk to a Yadav, they will say, nahi, we are not Shudra, we are Krishna ke Vansaj. If you talk to a Koiri, they also say the same thing. They have been told by their parents that you are not lower caste, you are higher caste. But the more you ask them to read, the more they understand. They are young, they are our future. So I'm hopeful about that. That yes, they are interested in these issues. But obviously, our schooling system keeps them away from these issues. But yeah, there is a future, I think.
So, Professor Gopal Guru has written about the exclusion of Dalits from social sciences. And in fact, one of the reasons that B.R. Ambedkar had given in his resignation note from Jawaharlal Nehru's cabinet in 1951 was his exclusion from decision making on foreign policy. I wanted to ask you about whether young students feel intimidated by the language of IR, by the language of foreign policy. For example, we have phrases like pariah state, untouchable actors, Pandit of Chinese studies. So, what happens to these young students, or let's just say people who've come to JNU from different parts of the country, people who are coming to Jadavpur University from different parts of the country, and they hear these phrases? What kind of expectations does this build in them? or let's say what kind of apprehensions does this trigger in them with regard to the study of foreign policy?
Yeah, before I answer this question, I would also like to add to your mentioning of Ambedkar and his resignation letter, and he says that I have differences with the cabinet on India's China policy, India's Pakistan policy, and India's US policy. These are the 2 3 points, and I have included that in my PhD also. Why I am mentioning this? I'm mentioning this because there were people from other caste background also who had deep interest in foreign affairs. But our founders of our institutions did not took them seriously. And Ambedkar is one such example. Ambedkar was interested in economics. His expertise was in economics. He was one of the few Indian expert who actually went to US to study. Nehru did not went to US to study. Gandhi did not went to US to study. Patel did not went to US to study. Ambedkar was one of the few who went to both US and UK and stayed there and learned something at least. And his expertise was in economics, but he was not given that portfolio. He had his disagreement over foreign policy, but his views, like Patel's views, were not taken seriously. Only a small group of people, those who were around Nehru's friend circle, they were appointed as the key positions. And this is not just a fault of Nehru. It is about the people around him. They were not as great and open as Nehru was. But they had their own parochial understandings of the society. And I think that should be remembered. We need to find it out who were the other people who had expertise in foreign policy, who came from different backgrounds, but they were never taken seriously. That's why I have chosen a topic, Vallabhbhai Patel and Indian foreign policy, because when Vallabhbhai Patel was such an influential person in Indian cabinet, but his suggestion on foreign policy were not taken seriously at all, be it on India's intervention or India's policy towards the Korean War, or India's recognition of India's recognition of China and it's supporting its membership in UN Security Council, or threat from China, or India's association with the West. All of this, it was not taken seriously. So what I'm trying to say is that no, please don't argue that we had no one else to say these things. That's why Tejwat Sapru or Nehru or Vijayalakshmi Pandit were on those seats. No, sorry, that is not the true story. The story is there were others also, like Ambedkar, like Patel, who had their own understanding, which could have led to disagreement, but this was not promoted in the in during that time. And with that, your question, sorry, I forgot your question.
So, my question was about the language of international relations, where the language is elitist, it's exclusionary, it's discriminatory. We have phrases like pariah state, untouchable actors, Pandit of Chinese studies. So, for individuals who are coming from depressed castes, who are coming from backgrounds which are impoverished, and when they have to deal with this kind of a language, and where they're also expected to learn this kind of a language, is it intimidating to them? I'm sure it's intimidating to them, but what I'm trying to understand is what is the process of learning for these students?
Because there is a hegemony of the one caste over the knowledge production. So there's not much resistance to this, because those young students also from all the caste, all the gender, sex groups, and everyone, they are being trained in the same language from their childhood. We are taught the same language in our schools, and so there isn't much uncomfortableness, at least I have observed. But obviously there are some critical students who observe this, raises the question, but because teachers also trained in those words, so they don't consider it as relevant. They think, no, this is not a question at all. Like, this is war. If you don't talk about pariah state, then what will you say it? They don't have a problem with that. That's why we need different discourses. That's why we have feminist discourses. Obviously they wouldn't move their position. You have to make your position strong. You have to make your argument strong. You have to you have to present your argument before everyone, that look, these words are problematic in nature, we shouldn't use it. We should rather have a vocabulary which is more inclusive in nature, and it's not going to change that easily. For some, it's a just vocabulary given by someone else, but now we have to invent our own vocabulary, a more democratic vocabulary. So yeah, I agree with that. But the number of students who are थोड़ा सा feared or intimidated is very less, because we have been socialized from our childhood to be normal with these things. So before that, we need to unlearn so many things in our classrooms, and our professors also need to unlearn so many things. Some of them are ready to unlearn, some of them are not. So we can't do much on that. But yes, we should continue the process of presenting our perspective, keep reaching to the people who are interested in these issues, like you are doing, beyond nation state. So it's a good entering point for all of them, that yes, there is a world beyond nation state also. What about those who no nation recognize them? What about those people? Where they will go? How they will survive? So those are the key concern now. And it's not that students are not interested. Students are interested, but it's the failure of the academia that we are not providing them the avenues. It would take time. Maybe you keep doing the more episodes on it, on these issues. Slowly, the people who are interested in these issues will increase. It's not, you can't expect that in a day people suddenly would turn from nation state to issues of race, gender, and caste, because they have not been taught for decades. So that's why I think it's a good start, at least.
I think it's probably a positive sign that there is now a new generation of scholars, very small in number though, very small in number, who are beginning to probe these aspects, who are asking these questions in a persistent manner, and who will hopefully lead the discipline in the coming years. So, Pavan, can you tell us what are you working on at the moment? What are your research interests, and what can we expect to read from you in the future?
Uh, like, I recently submitted my PhD, and that was on the history of Indian foreign policy. I explored Patel's views on Indian foreign policy, where I explored his approach toward China and Pakistan and US and USSR, generally state centric, because that was the perspective I used. Because now I'm familiar with a lot of literature of the time from 1947 till 1950. Now I'm aware of the views of Gandhi, Nehru, Ambedkar, that period. It has given so many entering point to me. So obviously I would work on so many things from this period, because I am familiar with this period. But apart from that, two other questions are, I'm very serious about two issues, and I think I would work on these issues in the coming years and decades. And these are about the Indian discipline of IR, international relations, and in this issues of gender and issues of caste, two most important issues, because recently we have seen when the pandemic started, we had manual after manual or in IR, you know, they could not find a single female expert in their panels. It's not just one institute. Almost all the institute did the thing. That why women are not invited to speak on security. And this is happening when we have women expert on the same issue. So this is again a question that okay, you can say that you do not have an expert on to bring in the issues of caste and IR, but that is certainly not true about the women. We have hundreds of women, a list that these are some 500, 600 women expert on Indian IR. They can speak on Indian IR, and 500 people is not a small list. So why that is the case? So currently I am working on a paper and on women in Indian IR along with Arushi. I would be presenting that paper at International Studies Association ISA next year in March 2022. I am also presenting one more paper, Caste and Indian IR. So because I would, in both the papers, I would be exploring the history, origin of Indian IR from 1947 till now. So it would give me at least a preliminary picture. I'm not expecting to write everything in these 4 or 5 months, but at least I would try to capture a broad picture of the representation of both, about both caste and gender, that how women are placed and which women are placed and where they are placed and why they are not invited even if they are in these universities in to speak on certain expertise. Like Tanvi Madan is one of the famous IR scholar currently on China, and she's not invited on the panels. Like why? Don't you know Tanvi Madan has written so many books? Like how can you not know her name? It's there, and so that amazes me that why that is the case. So I'm just trying to understand that. So obviously these issues I would be working in the coming months, caste and gender both, because I think and I strongly agree with Ambedkar and Uma Chakravarti. Uma Chakravarti in one of her book Gender in Caste, explained that issues of caste and gender are interrelated. In India, there is no emancipation for both of them until unless they help each other, they try to understand each other. And Ambedkar also said the same thing in one of his first article, Caste in India, that how origin of caste was linked to women's condition. So this is what I'm thinking of doing in the coming months.
Thank you very much, Pavan, for being with us. Hopefully, we'll see you soon on another episode of Beyond Nation and State. Thank you for listening to this episode of Beyond Nation and State. You can subscribe and listen to more episodes on our website, sunoindia.in, or on any other podcast app. Please rate our podcast and leave a comment if you like it. Suno India is an independent media platform trying to bring in new and diverse voices and perspectives. You can support us by visiting our contributors page on our website, sunoindia.in.